Greetings, vibrant viewers, and welcome to Healthy Living for today's program, Preventing and Reversing Heart Disease with Caldwell B. Esselstyn, M.D. Dr. Esselstyn is a pioneer in the use of a pure, plant-based diet to help heart patients regain happy, healthy lives. Dr. Esselstyn, who began his medical career in 1956, won a Bronze Star for his services as a surgeon for the U.S. military in Au Lac, Vietnam. From 1968 to the present, he has worked at the Cleveland Clinic in Ohio, USA. He is also past president of the American Association of Endocrine Surgeons, became the first recipient of the Benjamin Spock Award for Compassion in Medicine in 2005, and has been listed as one of the best physicians in the United States. His greatest contribution to the health sciences started when he began a 20-year peer-reviewed study which found that a plant-based diet can help heart disease patients. His findings are summarized in his book, Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease. We welcome Dr. Esselstyn on today's show to explain his effective program.
My story sort of actually began from being a chairman of our breast cancer task force, because in the late 1970s, early 1980s, I was extremely frustrated with the fact that no matter how many of these operations I was doing for women, there was not one single thing that I was doing for the next unsuspecting victim. And this finally led to a search of the world's literature. And it was apparent even then that in nations like Kenya, breast cancer was 20 times less frequent than in the United States. And in rural Japan, it was very, very infrequently seen in the 1950s. And yet, when the Japanese women would migrate to the United States, by the second and third generation, they now had the same rate of breast cancer as their Caucasian counterpart. And even more compelling, perhaps, was cancer of the prostate. When you look at the entire nation of Japan, in 1958, how many autopsy-proven deaths were there from cancer of the prostate? In the entire nation, 18. Wow. That is probably one of the most mind-boggling public health figures that I'm aware of. And yet by 1978, 20 years later, they were up to 237, which still pales to the 29,000 deaths that there will be from prostate cancer in this country this year. Well, as powerful as that was, I really chose to look at cardiovascular disease, which was the leading killer of women and men in Western civilization, because as part of this review, it was apparent that there were entire cultures that absolutely never experienced cardiovascular disease or heart attacks. Even today, if you look at the rural Chinese, the Papua Highlanders in New Guinea, Central Africa, the Tarahumara Indians in northern Mexico, if you're a heart surgeon and you go there expecting to earn a living, you better plan on selling pencils. So with that sort of background, it became very exciting and very compelling to see if it wouldn't be appropriate to apply this information, this background, to patients in this country who were severely ill with cardiovascular disease, because if we could get them to consume the same type of plant-based nutrition that was characteristic of these cultures that were virtually free of cardiovascular disease, perhaps not only could we arrest the disease, but there was always this haunting possibility that we could reverse the disease. And so that, in essence, was the background. And then I ended up going to our Department of Cardiology at the Cleveland Clinic in the summer of 1985, after I'd done it myself for a year and really felt confident with the fact that I could do it. I was kind of interested in this myself because my dad had had his first heart attack at age 43.
Wow.
So at that point, I received the cooperation of the Department of Cardiology, asking for 24 patients that were quite ill with cardiovascular disease, with the coronary artery disease. And the idea was to not to do their cardiology, of course, but I was simply going to be somebody who counseled them in plant-based nutrition to see if we couldn't take away from their plate, as it were, absolutely any food that was at all contributing to their cardiovascular illness. So I've had these 24 patients who had failed their first or second bypass operation. They had failed their first or second angioplasty. They were too sick for these procedures, or they had refused. And 5 of the 24 had been told by expert cardiologists they would not live out the year. And I'm happy to say that all 5 of those have lived beyond 22 years.
When Healthy Living returns, Dr. Esselstyn will share with us one of the main success factors he used to help his patients succeed in adopting a plant-based diet. Please keep your dial tuned here to Supreme Master Television. Welcome back to Healthy Living on Supreme Master Television. We are talking with Caldwell B. Esselstyn, MD, author of Preventing and Reversing Heart Disease, about his success in using a plant-based diet to help patients overcome heart disease without surgery.
So the next challenge was the rock upon which this study was most likely to fail or flounder would be lack of patient compliance.
Dr. Esselstyn reveals that a factor in helping the patients to adopt and stay on the diet was frequent and direct involvement with him as their physician and counselor.
And so for the first 5 years of the study, I saw every patient myself every 2 weeks, went over every morsel they ate, did their blood work, checked their weight and their blood pressure. The second 5 years, I stretched it out to every 4 weeks. And so we were still seeing them on a pretty regular basis. At the end of 10 years, they were all pretty well, by this time, on autopilot. And so I was seeing them quarterly, which is still quite a bit more than the average physician sees their cardiology patients once or twice a year. Yeah. And that's when we completed our 12-year study, and then we looked them all up again at 8 years later to bring it up beyond 20 years. I had published this multiple times in the peer-reviewed scientific literature, and then finally thought it was time to write a book for the public, because I think it had proved several things. We had proved that patients who were severely ill with heart disease, when properly instructed, would be willing to adopt to a significant lifestyle change that would not only eradicate the disease, but would also achieve reversal, as we'll see. That these patients also were willing to change, not for 3 months, not for 1 year, but actually to do this really for the rest of their lives. Because the thing that became so powerful in the eyes of the patients, their awareness was the fact that, look, I have now become the locus of control for this disease. Because there's nothing that a patient with heart disease or who's had a previous heart attack fears more than, when is the other shoe going to fall? When do I get the next heart attack? The families feel the same way. But just imagine how powerful it is when they recognize, when they continually follow this type of plant-based nutrition, that all that inflammation, all that formation of these ugly, fatal plaques in their arteries is going to cease, diminish, resolve, go away, and they're there.
So could you explain to us, just in layman's terms, what happens? Why does somebody get a heart attack? What happens to their arteries at that time?
The first thing that happens when you're eating this typical Western diet in Europe and America is that certain blood elements become very sticky. These delicate little cells that line the artery have a name. The endothelial cells, they get sticky. Platelets, which are a clotting factor in the blood, become sticky. your bad LDL cholesterol molecule becomes sticky. And so that's the first thing that happens. And then gradually what occurs is, with all this stickiness, the bad cholesterol molecule creeps underneath these endothelial cells, and a great deal of inflammation begins to develop. And the inflammation culminates in these very, very rascally cells that I sort of call the Darth Vader of the plaque. And those are a thing called the foam cell, which are really nothing more than white blood cells that are filled, gobbling up this bad LDL cholesterol that has crept under the endothelial cells. So what are the foam cells? What do those Darth Vaders do that's so bad? Well, they manufacture a lot of very, very aggressive inflammatory enzymes which erode the cap over the plaque. They erode the cap over the plaque, and at some place in the plaque, the cap becomes as thin as a cobweb. We now have the sheer force of blood running over that thinned out cobweb, whew, and it tears. Now, when that cap has torn, we call that a plaque rupture. And plaque rupture means that there's an opportunity for the extrusion, or the oozing out of, if you will, of plaque content out into the flowing blood. And now what happens is you have activated the platelets, the clotting factor. So as this material oozes out into the flowing blood, we now go to B, because we now have the formation of a clot trying to repair this ruptured plaque. And interestingly enough, this clot that is forming here is self-propagating. So often, in a matter of minutes from the time the plaque is ruptured, we have this clot forming here, and then bingo, suddenly the clot is now extended all the way across the artery. No time for collateral to develop. And all of the downstream muscle, which is being fed by this artery, is deprived of its oxygen and nutrients, and it dies. So that either we have a heart attack, or if it's large enough, or if there's a fatal arrhythmia, then we'll have a death. So this is how 90% of heart attacks occur. This whole series also tells us how it is that these patients never, ever have to have a heart attack. Never have to have a heart attack. Why? Because if you eat and behave in a way with your nutrition that you never make those Darth Vader cells that I call the foam cells, you never get that sequence of events, then you can make it so that you can absolutely strengthen the cap over any plaque that you have. And once the cap is strengthened and the plaque cannot rupture, you have made yourself heart attack proof.
So people who have eaten animal products, animal protein, meat in the past, when they just quit eating, completely quit eating these things that cause the plaque to form, then the body can heal over the plaque and prevent a heart attack.
Totally.
Completely.
Absolutely.
We are delighted to have had you with us today on Healthy Living. Join us again next Monday for part 2 of our discussion with Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn, author of Preventing and Reversing Heart Disease, on the effectiveness of a plant-based diet to help people suffering from heart disease. Please stay tuned for Science and Spirituality up next, right after noteworthy news here on Supreme Master Television. Best wishes for a healthy and happy life.